The river swallowed her screams until a stranger dove into the current. When he carried her ashore, the widow's breath trembled against the fading light, her soaked dress clinging like memory. The cowboy turned away, meaning only to help, but her voice stopped him cold. "Will you stay if I undress?" she whispered, the words more wounded than wanton. Beneath the sound of rushing water hung something heavier than desire, loneliness, guilt, and the quiet ache of two souls too tired to keep pretending they weren't broken. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you love Wild West stories. The river roared like a beast awakened, swollen with storm water and secrets of the mountain beyond. Dusk painted the horizon in bruised purple, lightning tracing the sky like cracks in a dying world. The woman had come to the river alone, her boots sinking into the trembling mud, her dress already heavy with rain. She stared at the black current as if it were a doorway, whispering her husband's name to the wind that no longer listened. The storm answered instead, violent, merciless, its gusts tearing at her shawl until it slipped from her shoulders and vanished downstream. She took one trembling step into the water, then another, until the current caught her skirt and pulled. Panic struck too late. Her breath turned to a scream swallowed by thunder. The water spun her, dragged her under. For a moment, she saw nothing but darkness, the muffled roar of the world collapsing round her. Then, through the torrent, came the pounding of hooves. A lone horseman rode the ridge, his coat whipping behind him like a flag of defiance. He saw her hand break the surface, a fleeting pale flash, and without thought, he leapt. The cold struck him like a blade. He fought the current, lungs burning, eyes stinging from the spray. When his fingers brushed fabric, he clutched in like salvation and kicked, forcing them both toward the jagged shore. The river tried to steal them back. It clung and twisted, but he wouldn't let go. The widow coughed, choking, her hair plastered across her face. He dragged her onto the gravel bank, collapsing beside her, both gasping as the rain hammered their skin. For a long, breathless moment, neither moved. The river raged a few feet away, angry at losing its prey. He rolled to his knees, wiping mud from his eyes, and turned her over. Her lips were blue, her pulse faint beneath cold fingers. He pressed his hand to her chest, counting heartbeats that barely answered. Then, one gasp, then another. Her eyes fluttered open, wild and confused. "You're safe," he rasped, though his voice trembled. She didn't answer, only stared past him, as if the storm were whispering to her in a language he couldn't hear. Lightning flashed again, revealing the haunted line of her face, young, but carved by last. He took off his coat, draped it over her shoulders, and turned toward the road, scanning for shelter. None in sight, only endless plains and the black skeletons of trees. He looked back at her. She was shaking violently now, but her gaze followed him, pleading without words. He sighed, slung his coat tighter around her, and whispered a prayer neither of them believed. Behind them, the river kept roaring, demanding what it was owed. But tonight, it would go hungry. The night pressed down heavy on the riverbank, the air thick with the smell of wet earth and lightning. She lay there coughing, each breath tearing through her chest like broken glass, river water spilling from her lips along with a sob she hadn't meant to release. The cowboy crouched beside her, his coat already soaked through, his hat lost to the current. He said nothing, only pulled his coat tighter around her shivering frame, careful not to meet her eyes. The fire of rescue had already faded from his veins, replaced by the uneasy quiet that follows near death. The storm had passed, but its echo lingered between them, a rhythm of rain dripping from the trees and the faint tremor of her breath. She turned her face away, embarrassed by the sound of her own crying, but the tears kept coming, mingling with the rain streaking her cheeks. He watched her from the corner of his eye, jaw tight, the muscles in his neck drawn like wire. The wind tugged at his hair, whispered through the reeds, hearing the low, restless hum of the river that had nearly claimed her. He wanted to ask why she'd been there, alone, so close to the crossing, but the words died before reaching his mouth. Some things, he knew, were heavier left unspoken. She caught her breath finally, a ragged sound that turned into a low, bitter laugh. "It doesn't stop," she whispered, more to herself than to him. He pretended not to hear. Instead, he reached into his saddlebag, pulling out a small tin flask. He handed it to her without a word. She hesitated, her hands trembling, then drank, wincing at the burn. It steadied her, if only for a moment. The sky cracked open with distant thunder again, softer now, like the grumbling of something tired. Across the river, lightning revealed the silhouette of a broken fence, a house long abandoned. He took note of it but made no move. She was too weak to travel. He sat back, resting on his heels, feeling the ache of the cold settle into his bones. The widow, he guessed she was one, by her clothes and the haunted emptiness in her eyes, pulled the coat tighter around her shoulders. She still hadn't thanked him. He didn't expect her to. Gratitude had no place between the living and the half-dead. The silence deepened, stretching thin as thread, filled only by the sound of the river licking at the stones below. When she finally looked at him, her expression was unreadable, a mix of suspicion and sorrow. "Why'd you do it?" she asked softly. He didn't answer. Maybe he didn't know. The wind picked up again, scattering a spray of river mist between them like glass dust in moonlight. For a long while, neither spoke. The night grew colder, the stars hiding behind heavy clouds. He closed his eyes, listening to the sound of her breathing, steady but fragile. It reminded him of something lost long ago, something he wasn't ready to remember. The wind had softened to a weary sigh, dragging the scent of wet sagebrush across the riverbank as the storm limped westward. The fire he'd coaxed to life crackled weakly, spitting at the damp logs as if fighting for a breath, the same way she had hours earlier. The widow sat close to the flames, wrapped in his coat, her face half hidden in shadow, her body still trembling, not from the chill, but from something deeper. The cowboy, Elias, sat a few feet away, sharpening his knife more for the sound than the need, his gaze fixed on the flicker of steel instead of the woman beside him. Between them stretched a silence so tight it felt like a living thing. He could hear her teeth chatter softly, could feel her eyes on him, weighing his distance, measuring the edge of his restraint. The night pressed closer, heavy and intimate, the kind of darkness that made confessions come uninvited. When she finally spoke, her voice was cracked and low, scraping through the quiet like a ghost learning to speak again. "Will you stay if I undress?" The knife slipped from his hand, the blade glinting as it struck the stone. For a heartbeat, he didn't breathe. He turned slowly toward her, disbelief cutting through his exhaustion. Her face was pale in the firelight, but her eyes, those eyes, held no invitation, only a raw, pleading emptiness that stripped him bare of words. She clutched the coat closer, as if she already regretted what she'd said, her fingers twisting the fabric like a lifeline. Elias's voice came rough, unsure. "Ma'am." He started, but she shook her head, the motion small, desperate. "I don't mean it that way," she whispered, and her lip quivered. I can't stand being left again. Not tonight. Not after." Her gaze flicked toward the river, its black current gleaming faintly in the firelight. He followed her eyes, understanding blooming slow and heavy in his chest. The question wasn't about flesh. It was about fear. Fear of the cold creeping back into her bones, fear of waking to emptiness, fear that even God had forgotten her name. He took a breath, long and careful, his hands flexing as if they'd forgotten how to rest. "You're safe," he said finally, voice steady now. "Ain't going nowhere till the light breaks." She nodded, eyes glistening, though her shoulders still trembled beneath the weight of his coat. The fire popped again, sending a trail of sparks into the air like fleeting prayers. Neither spoke after that. She stared at the flames, he at the river, both pretending not to feel the fragile thread that had just been spun between them, a thread woven from shame, gratitude, and something dangerously close to hope. The storm had passed, but its echo still lived in their silence, waiting to see which of them would break first. The fire had burned down to a sullen glow, its embers pulsing faintly like the heartbeat of something dying slow. The night around them pressed close, dense, wet, and full of whispering insects that seemed to murmur secrets neither of them wished to hear. Elias rose first, stretching his sore limbs, glancing at the woman huddled in his coat. She looked smaller now, fragile as frost beneath the trembling light. He hesitated before reaching out his hand. "There's cover yonder," he said softly, voice rough from disuse. She stared at his hand a moment before taking it, her fingers cold and uncertain. Together, they crossed the muddy bank, the river still growling behind them like an old beast not yet satisfied. A fallen tree lay near the edge of the woods, its roots twisted skyward like a hand clawing at heaven. Beneath it, a hollow offered just enough shelter from the lingering drizzle. Elias guided her there, spreading his bedroll on the ground without a word. She lowered herself slowly, clutching his coat around her, her eyes searching the dark as if afraid the river might rise to follow. For a while, the only sound was the steady drip of water from the branches above. Then, quietly, she spoke. "My name's Clara," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. "Clara Hensley." The name hung in the air like a fragile thread. Elias nodded once, though he didn't look at her. "Elias," he muttered, poking the fire with a stick. The silence stretched again until she added, "My husband was a miner. He drowned here last spring." Her gaze drifted toward the water, glinting faintly through the trees. He was trying to cross with a load of gold dust. The current took him before the weight did. Her throat tightened, but no tears came. She had none left. "They never found his body," she whispered. Elias said nothing, though the muscles in his jaw twitched. He'd seen too many men swallowed by water and war alike. He wanted to offer comfort, but the words sat heavy, unspoken. Instead, he murmured, "I'm sorry," and meant it. She nodded faintly, eyes distant. "I thought maybe if I came back, if I stood where he fell, I might understand." Her fingers clenched the coat. "But all I found was the river, hungry as ever." Elias finally met her eyes then, gray meeting gray, and something unspoken passed between them. Recognition. Two ghosts who'd both tried and failed to bury the past beneath the same dirt. He turned back to the fire, staring into its trembling light, his face carved in shadow. "Ain't the river's fault," he said quietly. "It just takes what's given." She studied him, sensing a weight behind those words he didn't care to explain. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of ash and rain. Neither spoke again, but in the hush that followed, their grief seemed to braid together, two strangers bound by loss, finding in silence the only prayer they still remembered how to say. The rain had thinned to a gentle whisper by the time Elias found a hollow beneath a low, rocky overhang, a space dry enough to hold a fire and small enough to trap a little warmth. He gathered kindling from the driftwood scattered along the shore, his fingers stiff from the cold, his movements slow and methodical. The widow, Clara, watched in silence, clutching his coat around her shoulders while the last tremors of fear leaked out of her bones. When the fire finally caught, it bloomed with a soft hiss, the light painting her face in trembling gold and shadow. She moved closer, her hands extended toward the heat, her skin glistening with the remnants of river water. Her dress clung to her, heavy and dark, the fabric breathing steam into the cool air. She began to wring it out, twisting it over the stones, the sound of dripping water mingling with the popping of the flames. Elias turned his eyes away, staring into the fire as if it held the answers to questions he hadn't asked in years. The orange glow licked at the cave walls, revealing carvings left by someone long gone, initials in a half-finished prayer. Clara's breath steadied as the warmth found her again. After a long silence, she spoke, her voice barely louder than the crackle of the kindling. "He used to sing to me," she said, eyes fixed on the flames. "When the workday ended, he'd sit by that same river and hum. Said it calmed the gold dust in his lungs." Her lips trembled in a half-smile that wasn't joy. "After he drowned, I went back every evening and sang for him. Thought maybe the river would carry my voice to wherever he was." The firelight flickered across her face, catching the wet shine in her eyes. Elias said nothing at first. He rubbed the back of his neck, feeling the old scars beneath his collar, the ghosts that never quite stayed buried. "I've buried men, too," he said finally, the words rough and uneven. "Some I knew, some I didn't. War don't give a man much choice who he leaves behind." His tone carried no bitterness, just the quiet exhaustion of someone who had run too far and found the past waiting anyway. Clara's gaze lifted to him then, searching the lines of his face for the truth in his voice. The fire popped, sending sparks upward like fragments of lost souls rising toward the night. "You ever go back?" she asked softly. "To where it happened?" He shook his head. "Ain't nothing left there worth digging up," he said. She nodded slowly, understanding. The silence that followed wasn't empty this time, It was heavy with unspoken grief, with the strange comfort of being seen by someone who knew the same kind of ache. Outside, the river murmured like a restless spirit, but for the first time that night, neither of them listened. They had their own ghosts to tend, and the fire between them burned just bright enough to keep them at bay. The fire had burned down to a steady pulse, its glow soft and amber, filling the hollow beneath the rocks with fragile warmth. The storm had gone, leaving behind only the slow drip of water from the overhang and the sigh of a weary wind moving through the trees. Clara sat close to the flames, her dress still heavy and clinging, every thread soaked through. The wet fabric shivered against her skin with each gust of cold air. She rubbed her arms, but the trembling wouldn't stop. Elias, sitting just a few feet away, could hear her teeth faintly clicking together. He looked toward the fire, not at her, but his thoughts were restless, tumbling like stones in the current. When she finally spoke, her voice was fragile but clear, cutting through the hush. "It still went," she whispered. "If I keep it on, I'll freeze before morning." Elias nodded once, his throat tight. "Ain't my place to tell you what to do," he murmured, keeping his gaze on the flames. She hesitated, clutching the coat he'd given her, then slowly began to peel away the sodden fabric of her dress. The sound of it, wet cloth against skin, seemed louder than it should have been. He turned his head sharply, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the firelight, his jaw locking. Each motion she made was careful, trembling, more about survival than shame. Her breath came quick at first, then steadied as the heat brushed her bare skin. In the flickering glow, her shoulders caught the light, pale and glistening like moonlit stone. For the first time, the cold began to release her, but something else took its place, a strange quiet that wasn't just relief, but remembrance. She wrapped his coat around herself, the rough wool swallowing her completely. It smelled faintly of horse, gunpowder, and pine. She drew it tighter, closing her eyes, breathing in the scent as if it might tether her back to the world. Elias shifted, his boots grinding against gravel. "You'll be warm soon," he said, though his voice was barely a whisper. "Fire's strong enough now." She nodded, eyes still closed, a faint tremor still in her fingers. "Thank you," she said softly, not out of gratitude but as a confession, as if the words were the last fragile piece of pride she still owned. He glanced over his shoulder then, just once, and saw her outlined in gold, the firelight dancing along the curve of her neck, her hair drying in tangled waves, the coat wrapped close like a shield. Something inside him stirred, not desire, not pity, just a deep ache, the kind that reminded him they were both still alive. She opened her eyes, meeting his for the briefest second, and in that look there was no widow, no savior, no river, only two broken creatures, thawing beside the same fragile fire, pretending for one small moment that the world hadn't already taken too much from them. The fire had settled into a deep, steady glow, its flames no longer wild but patient, as if listening. Outside, the river murmured, endless sound that slipped between the pauses of silence like a memory refusing to die. Clara sat cross-legged near the embers, wrapped in his coat, her hair hanging loose around her shoulders. Her eyes were fixed on the shifting light, but her mind seemed far beyond it, wandering the cold edges of thought where ghosts still lived. Elias leaned back against the rock wall, his hat pulled low, the firelight carving sharp lines into his face. He hadn't spoken in some time. Neither had she. The quiet stretched, thin as thread, until Clara's voice finally broke through it, trembling but sure. "I went into the river on purpose," she said. The words didn't shock the air. They settled into it, heavy and calm. Elias didn't move, though his fingers flexed once against his knee. She kept her eyes on the fire. "I waited until the sky turned dark. I walked out as far as I could. Thought if I just stopped fighting, the water would do what it wanted. Thought I'd see him again on the other side." Her breath hitched, but no tears came. She'd already spent them all. "But I changed my mind too late. The river don't forgive hesitation." Her lips parted in something like a laugh, hollow and small. "Guess it didn't want me either." Elias watched her, his expression unreadable. After a long moment, he said quietly, "You ain't the first to think that way." His voice carried a weight she hadn't heard before, something cracked deep beneath the surface. "I've done worse than walk into a river." His gaze drifted past her, past the fire, toward a horizon only he could see. Wars full of noise, smoke, screaming. You don't think, you just move. I had a friend, Ben Harper. We rode together since we were boys. Got pinned down one night outside Dodge. He took a bullet through the leg, couldn't ride. Elias's throat worked as he swallowed. I promised him I'd come back, but I didn't. He drew in a slow, trembling breath. Stayed alive, though. If that counts for anything. Clara didn't look away this time. Does it? She asked softly. He almost smiled, but it was bitter and short. Most days, no. The fire crackled between them, small sparks rising like lost prayers. Seems the river ain't the only thing that drowns folk, he murmured, eyes fixed on the flames. Some of us carry our own water wherever we go. The words sank into the stillness, heavy as stones. Clara's hand brushed the earth, feeling the tremor of the fire's warped. Then maybe, she whispered, we just found each other before it took the both of us. He didn't answer, but when the next gust of wind came, he leaned a little closer to the fire, as if to guard it from going out. The rain eased to a steady whisper beyond the overhang, soft as breath against the leaves, the night no longer howling but sighing, as though the world itself had grown tired. Inside their small refuge, the fire burned low, throwing gentle light across the stone and the two souls sitting within its fragile circle. Clara sat close to the flames, her eyes half-lidded, her face streaked with the faint silver of drying tears. She had said too much, yet not enough. Some confessions, once spoken, only opened deeper wounds. The silence that followed was thick, not with discomfort, but with the raw stillness of people who had nothing left to hide. Elias sat across from her, his elbows resting on his knees, his hat tossed aside, his eyes fixed on the fire. The smoke curled upward, twisting into the dark as if searching for a heaven neither of them believed in anymore. For the first time since he dragged her from the river, he allowed himself to really look at her, not as a stranger, not as a widow, but as someone surviving the same storm he was still walking through. Her lips parted slightly, trembling as though to speak, but no words came. Instead, she reached out, hesitating in the air between them. Elias didn't move, didn't speak. He simply waited. When her fingers brushed the rough fabric of his shirt, something inside him stilled, a moment that wasn't about comfort or desire, but recognition. Slowly, she leaned toward him, her movements small, unsteady, like a wounded animal deciding whether or not to trust the hand that saved it. When her head came to rest against his chest, he froze, breath caught in his throat. He could feel the tremor of her body, the uneven rhythm of her breathing sinking slowly with his own. It wasn't passion that drew to him. It was exhaustion, the kind that hollowed out the heart until all that was left was the need to feel another pulse beside it. Elias hesitated only a moment longer before letting his arm settle around her shoulders. The gesture was awkward, almost clumsy, as though he'd forgotten how to hold another human being. Outside, thunder rolled far away, not fierce anymore but weary, fading into the distance. The fire popped, sending a trail of sparks spiraling into the air, tiny flares of orange that disappeared as quickly as they were born. They watched them rise and vanish, silent prayers neither would ever say aloud. Clara's eyes fluttered shut, her head sinking deeper against his chest. Elias stared into the flames, seeing things that weren't there, faces, battlefields, the hollow eyes of the man he'd left behind. For the first time in years, the memories didn't claw at him. They just existed, like the river, unforgiving, but no longer hungry. The storm outside had broken, but the one inside them, the guilt, the grief, the unspoken ache, had finally begun to give way, not to joy or absolution, but to something quieter, something that felt dangerously close to peace. The dawn crept in slow and cold, dragging its pale light across the soaked earth like a reluctant promise. The fire had died to ash, only a thin curl of smoke rising from the embers that glowed faintly beneath the gray. Elias stirred, his muscles stiff, his breath visible in the morning chill. For a moment, he didn't remember where he was. The sound of the river filled his head, steady and endless, and the smell of wet stone pressed close. Then memory returned, sharp and heavy. He sat up fast, heart thudding, his eyes scanning the hollow beneath the rocks. The code was gone. Clara was gone. The space beside him, Where she'd slept with her head against his chest was only a ghost of warmth fading into the cold air. Panic rippled through him before reason could speak. He rose, stumbling over roots and stones, eyes fixed on the shimmer of water beyond the trees. The river looked calm now, deceitfully gentle, sunlight beginning to skim its surface like a blade. And there she was, Clara, standing at its edge, his coat wrapped around her like a borrowed skin. Her bare feet pressed into the mud, toes touching the water's edge. She didn't move. Her hair caught the wind, long and tangled, glowing faintly in the dawn. For one sickening heartbeat, Elias thought she would step forward, surrender herself back to the current that had nearly claimed her twice. His breath caught in his throat. "Clara," he said softly, but the wind swallowed her name. He took a cautious step toward her, the crunch of gravel sharp beneath his boots. Still, she didn't turn. Her reflection rippled in the water, fractured and strange, like a soul halfway between two worlds. Finally, her voice drifted back to him, low, steady, almost peaceful. "I'm still here." The words were barely louder than the river, but they struck him harder than gunfire. She looked down at her reflection as though seeing it for the first time, as though surprised it hadn't vanished overnight. Elias exhaled, long and slow, the tightness in his chest easing though his throat ached with something he couldn't name. He didn't move closer. He understood, some moments weren't meant to be broken by company. The river gurgled softly, carrying salt and fallen leaves, as if whispering its own kind of absolution. The sky began to open above them, a soft gold seeping through the clouds, catching on the ripples of water. Clara's fingers loosened at her sides, and she let out a breath that seemed to shake free the last of whatever had bound her to that place. "I'm still here," she said again, quieter this time, a promise to herself. Elias finally stepped beside her, his eyes following hers to the trembling reflection that mirrored them both, two survivors bound by chance and grief. For the first time in years, he felt something like mercy, not the kind prayed for, but the kind earned in silence, after the worst had already passed. The sun had climbed higher by the time Elias gathered his things, the light filtering through the trees in streaks of pale gold. The river no longer seemed menacing, just another piece of the land, running its course without pity or malice. The air smelled of damp earth and ash, and the quiet that hung between them was gentler now, though still uncertain. Elias moved with a kind of weary precision, tightening the saddle straps, checking the cinch, his every motion deliberate, as if keeping his hands busy might keep his thoughts from wandering back to the night before. His horse stamped once, impatient to be gone, its breath misting in the cool morning air. Clara stood a few paces away, still wearing his coat, her bare feet streaked with mud but her eyes clear for the first time since he'd pulled her from the water. She watched him silently, the wind tugging at her hair, and though she didn't speak, he could feel her questions pressing against the silence. He adjusted the reins, swung one leg over the saddle, and was about to nudge the horse forward when her voice came, soft, uncertain, but steady enough to stop him mid-motion. "You said you were heading west." Elias turned slightly, looking down at her. She took a hesitant step forward, her fingers clutching the edge of the coat tighter around her frame. "There's land out there," she continued, her tone trembling between hope and fear. "And people who don't know my sins. Folks who won't look at me and see a woman who tried to follow her husband into the river." She lifted her chin then, just barely, and the fragile courage in that small gesture caught him harder than any bullet ever could. "Would you let me come with you?" she asked. The question hung in the morning air like mist, thin and shimmering, impossible to ignore. Elias stared at her for a long moment, his jaw tightening as he weighed the pull in his chest against the voice in his head that told him to keep riding. He had been alone so long he'd learned to wear solitude like armor, and now she was asking him to lay it down. His gaze drifted past her to the river, the water glinting under the rising sun, carrying away the remnants of last night's storm. "It ain't an easy road," he said finally, his voice low but not unkind. "The land out there's rough. Lonelier than you think." She nodded, eyes steady on his. "I can stand loneliness," she said. "I just can't stand being a ghost." Her words settled deep in him, quiet but undeniable. He exhaled slowly, running a gloved hand down the horse's neck, then offered her his hand without another word. For a heartbeat, she only stared at it, then took it, her grip firm despite the tremor in her fingers. When he helped her onto the saddle behind him, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of cedar and ash away. The river kept whispering in the distance, but neither of them turned to look back. The morning mist rolled across the plains like a living thing, soft and silver, swallowing the edges of the trail as Elias and Claire rode side by side through the hush of the world just waking. The sun was still low, its light thin and uncertain, bleeding through the fog in muted streaks that painted everything in shades of forgiveness. The sound of hooves against the damp earth echoed faintly, rhythmic and steady, the kind of sound that steadied the heart without trying. Elias kept his eyes forward, the brim of his hat low, the reins loose in his calloused hands. Beside him, Clara sat straight in the saddle, her borrowed coat wrapped tight around her frame, her face turned toward the horizon as though it held a promise she hadn't dared to believe in before. Neither spoke. There was no need. Between them stretched something fragile but whole, a silence that didn't demand to be filled, only honored. The river was far behind now, hidden by the fog in the distance, but its voice still lingered faintly in their memories, a reminder of what it had taken and what it had chosen to leave. Elias breathed in the scent of wet grass and sagebrush, and for the first time in years, the air didn't feel heavy in his lungs. He glanced sideways at Clara once, catching the faintest hint of a smile at the corner of her mouth. It wasn't joy exactly, but something quieter, a kind of relief, maybe, the simple act of existing without pain for a few fleeting minutes. The trail ahead curved west, its end unseen, its path uncertain. They followed it anyway. Every mile put another inch between them and the ghosts that had haunted their nights, the drowned husband, the dying friend, the sins that couldn't be buried but no longer demanded to be confessed. The land began to open wide, the mist thinning as the sun climbed higher, spilling gold across the plain. The silence changed then, not broken, but deepened, as if their shared breathing, their steady pace, had become its own language. Clara adjusted her seat and looked toward the sky, her voice barely above a whisper. "Feels different," she said. Elias nodded. "It does." She didn't ask him what he meant, and he didn't explain. The understanding lived somewhere between them, unspoken but real. Redemption, they both knew now, wasn't something waiting at the end of the road. It was the road itself, the choosing to keep going, to see the sun rise again after the dark tried to take you. A hawk circled above them, its shadow sliding across the grass, brief and quiet. The river's sound was gone completely now, swallowed by the vastness ahead. Claire looked back once, her gaze soft, her lips moving as if in silent farewell. Then she faced forward again, and Elias did too. The fog continued to lift, revealing the long stretch of the frontier, undeined, uncertain, but theirs. Together, they rode on, and the ghosts finally stayed behind. The sun had climbed fully above the horizon now, washing the world in a glow of amber and rose, the light stretching long over the plains as though it were blessing the path ahead. The mist had burned away, revealing a land wide and unending, where each breath of wind seemed to carry the echo of everything left behind. Elias and Clara rode in silence through the morning calm, their horses moving slow and steady, hooves muffled by the soft earth. The air smelled of sage and sun-warmed soil, the sky so clear it seemed to stretch forever. Clara's hair caught the light, threads of gold glinting beneath the rim of his coat's collar. She rode close beside him now, no longer the fragile shadow he'd found trembling by the river. There was color in her cheeks, a quiet steadiness in her gaze, though her eyes still carried the soft weight of memory. The silence between them wasn't hollow anymore. It was filled with something gentle, something whole. Elias could feel it in the rhythm of the ride, the way her breathing matched his, the quiet certainty that they were both still learning how to live again. The road curved west, the land rolling out before them like a promise neither dared to name. For a while, they simply listened to the wind moving through the tall grass, to the soft creak of saddle leather, to the world returning to itself after the long night. Then, as the sun climbed higher and the warmth began to seep into their bones, Clara spoke. Her voice was soft, almost fragile, but it carried clearly in the still air. "Elias," she said, and he turned slightly, the sound of his name spoke in that way stopping him more than any bullet ever had. She hesitated a breath, then added, "Thank you for staying." Her words hung there, delicate and real, as if she'd offered him something precious and wasn't sure he'd take it. Elias said nothing at first. He simply looked at her, really looked, and saw the woman she'd become since the river, not the one who had wanted to die, but the one who had chosen to live. The corner of his mouth twitched upward, the faintest suggestion of a smile, worn and unsure but honest. He gave a small nod, as though her gratitude needed no answer. The wind rose then, tugging at his hat, swirling around them in a soft, restless dance. It caught her words, lifting them away, carrying them back toward the distant sound of water faintly whispering beyond the hills. For a moment, it almost seemed the river was listening, remembering, conceding. It couldn't have them both, not anymore. Claire exhaled softly, her eyes bright in the sunlight. Elias shifted in the saddle, gaze fixed on the golden line of the horizon. Together, they rode on, the silence between them no longer heavy but alive, carried by the same wind that had once threatened to break them. And somewhere far behind, the river kept its promise. It held its dead, but it let the living go. Wait, help us tell more stories from the quiet frontier. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell. You'll be the first to know when the next chapter arrives.